Okay, good evening. So today we have an invited speaker, Ms. Ariel Mack, and she is an expert in master planning for carbon. And he is currently working in Arup, the leading consultants company in Hong Kong. So I will pass the time to Ariel, Ms. Mack. And one thing to remind you is that by the end of the semester, there would be an in-class test, and there will be at least 2 multiple choice questions on the seminar content by Ms. Mack. All right, so at least 2 multiple choice questions. So keep concentrated about the content. So I will pass the time to Ariel. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so maybe a bit about myself and just a bit about background. So I'm doing a lot on sustainability planning, carbon planning, and smart city master planning as well. And what we normally do is we look at a bigger scale on a territorial level, what each location should have or how accessible they are, the types of initiatives we should plan for example, whether we need to include a particular smart city concepts or carbon management tools or carbon reduction, waste reduction. So those types of things that we're looking at in the master planning level. I'll start off with 2 things I want to talk about during this 2.5-3 hours. One is why carbon is important in master planning and how to integrate carbon management in master planning. So why carbon is important in master planning? It's because we want to look at 3 particular things. One is the urban carbon emissions. The second is climate change impact on our urban environment. And third, whether or not we can incorporate sustainability solutions in our cities and urban environment. So from the urban carbon emissions perspective, because we live in a densely populated area and because we've got all these human activities, there are related carbon emissions from them. So for example, in vehicles, we've got vehicular emissions, we've got energy use, water consumption, normal waste, pollutions, etc. And all those have their related carbon emissions. So a bit about background as well. In the 1990s, so quite a long time ago, you can see a lot of the places aren't exactly what we term as urban. Most of the urban population is in the Americas, where the brownish color is, that's where it is. With the red large circles are where the most densely populated areas are. And those are all around the coastline. So you've got the eastern side of China, a couple of red spots in India, and mostly in the Americas as well. And in that point in time, there's only around 40% of people living in the cities, so what we know as urban environment. Moving on closer to 2018, we've got a high percentage of urban areas. So you see Australia's turned dark brown, and quite a few cities in Africa has turned dark brown as well. And in Americas, it's got even darker brown. And you can see that there's a lot more cities coming up because of modernization, people becoming more affluent, and more people moving between cities. And more than half of the people at this point in time is already living in the cities. So we've got a higher population, we've got more high rises, we've got more jobs in the cities. And it is estimated in the 2030, there'll be even more than that. So around 6 out of 10 people would live in cities. So urban, rural areas, we won't have as many people. We've got a lot more activities happening inside the cities themselves. We've got a lot more traffic and a lot more waste. So by 2030, approximately 5.2 to 5.6 million people would live in the cities, and there'll be more than 600 cities with more than 1 million people. If we look at that, that means that there'll be a lot more people walking around, a lot more people dumping waste, a lot more people needing to use energy, needing to go somewhere, and needing resources. And because of that, because we need more resources, we need to plan for it. So more high rises, we need more food, we need more fuel, and we need more water. This is just the normal things that we need. And because of our needs, we have, of course, outputs, which are in terms of air pollution, we've got waste, we've got noise. So all these types of things that we discarded would contribute to an equivalent carbon emissions. And today's cities account for around 71 to 76% of carbon emissions, and we use around 67 to 76% of energy use. But at the same time, high density areas are actually consuming less energy because we can actually easier to transport energy, easier to transport resources to a singular place without having to go for a wider area. So if we look back at this particular map, if you remember a couple of slides back, a lot of the larger cities are places with the larger circles. And you can see that those are also the areas with a high risk of disasters. So for example, flooding, you've got typhoons or cyclones, depending on where you are. You've got wildfires down in Australia and in the Indonesian areas. You've got drought. So all these types of different climate change impacts are actually impacting on more people because we live in dense areas. In 2019, around 35% live in high-emitting countries. And because we are living there, there are 10% of people actually contributing to around 34 to 45% of the household GHG emissions. And the GHG emissions are actually the major impact. So high urban emissions accelerates the climate change and increasing urgency for mitigation strategies in cities. What this means is that we need to somehow figure out a way in which we can actually either mitigate or build up resilience towards these climate change impacts. I haven't updated this slide with the latest images of the latest typhoon, but we can see that emissions actually cause a lot of problems in urban cities. We've got bigger floods, we've got higher winds, we've got a lot more destruction because of this higher winds. So it increases the precipitations. We've got stronger winds and heavier rainfalls, longer storm surges. For example, this year we've already got 2 Typhoon 10s, we've got black rain, and we've got higher rainfalls as well. And I'm not sure if you've felt it yourselves, but we've got more hot days than cold days. So right now, normally 10, 15 years ago, we'll be wearing long sleeves. Now we're all in short sleeves and we're sweating all the time. And that is because of the climate change and the emissions impact. What cities did was that they came together, so the C40 Cities Leadership Group actually came together and say, we've got to do something about this. 27 cities right now actually have pledged to actually have their buildings near net zero by 2030, and to actually transition all buildings to net zero by 2050. On the left-hand side, all those are the signatory cities that say we'll be doing something. And those with the purplish color is saying, oh, our municipal buildings themselves, so the government buildings, will actually do a bit better than what they want the commercial buildings to do. Because we need to move on towards a net zero, or at least reduce our carbon emissions in the cities, in the buildings, we need to think up solutions and to promote a healthier urban environment, a healthier living environment for everyone. So in urban cities worldwide, there's an increasing contribution of carbon from industrialization and rapid development. This is more prominent in, for example, developing countries rather than like established cities like the US or European areas. And there are distinct challenges to managing carbon emissions because of our dense metropolitan environment and because we need economic activities. However, it is also an opportunity to apply innovative solutions, for example, smart solutions inside our cities to manage this or to actually create a better environment. So in Hong Kong, three major policy papers or white papers actually came out. 2015, we've got the climate change report, where the Hong Kong government said we need to reduce 60 to 65% of carbon intensity. Moving on to 2017, they say we need to reduce it by 2030 at exact same level. However, recently they're saying, or at least 2021, it says to reduce 50 by 2035 and to actually achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So they added the new carbon neutrality directions from then on. I'm not sure if you've actually looked at the plan right now, but looking at the plan, these are the four major strategic areas that the Hong Kong government have been looking towards. Net zero electricity generation, so from renewable sources or new energy saving and green buildings, which a lot of the master planning actually focus on how to have energy efficiency. Green transport, an upcoming topic, and I'm sure you've already heard with new hydrogen buses. Waste reduction, another controversial topic because of the waste fees. How they're doing right now is that they have transitioned from coal energy for daily generation. So if you look at the two pie charts, Hong Kong Electric, the HKE, actually transitioned mostly towards natural gas. They're slowly reducing in the coal generation, whereas China Lights, or CLP, they're buying nuclear energy from Daya Bay, so they are moving more towards renewable energies and natural gases, and slowly reducing the amount of coal that they use in the energy production. However, there's still more to be done to actually fully transition into renewable energy fuel mix by 2035. We're at 2025 right now, and so far there hasn't been much effort to fully transition into renewable energy. In terms of energy saving, this is where we've done a lot, at least the government has done a lot. So with energy reduction in consumption compared to the 2050 levels, the 30 to 40 and the 20 to 30 for residential and commercial buildings, those are the targets by 2030, or 2050, sorry. But right now we're actually moving quite well for the interim target, where I think it was around 11% for commercial and around another 10% for residential, and that's on the energy consumption because we've promoted green standards. For example, BEAM Plus. A lot of the government buildings actually are now required to achieve gold or higher for BEAM Plus. A lot of the commercial buildings, because of ESG, they actually try to go for platinum or actually go for LEEDs. Infrastructure projects, for example, Hong Kong Airport, their latest one, I think it was the third runway, they actually went for the BREEAM infrastructure gold, I think it was, or somewhere around there, but at the second highest one. So we are doing quite a lot to promote green standards and energy efficiency. Green transport, I've mentioned. Zero vehicular emissions, zero carbon in transport sector before 2050, and the promotion of electric vehicle, hydrogen, and fuel cells. These two were actually quite on track. The Hong Kong government's promotion of electric vehicles, more electrical chargers, actually needing buildings to have electrical chargers inside commercial and residential areas, and requiring all government buildings to be to have the medium charging, fast charging available. So they are actually pushing quite a lot for the electric vehicle, and we've got the hydrogen buses on trial. We've got autonomous vehicle on trial as well. So we're actually doing quite well in the green transport areas. And with waste reduction, I'm sure many of you have already heard, we actually have great waste to energy facilities. So the iPark Phase 1 and Phase 2, I think Phase 1 is already in operation, Phase 2 is coming up in 2030. We're phasing out the disposable plastic. So right now we don't have any more plastic straws, and they're slowly moving into Phase 2 depending on the availability of alternatives. And of course, we've got the carbon neutral waste to energy treatment, so the OPARCs. And what this would do for our city is that it would improve the air quality. Reducing carbon emissions would lead to cleaner air. So it's better health overall for the residents. And we reduce heat island effects. So in theory, we should have cooler urban areas, making areas better for people to live in. And because of that, we enhance the urban sustainability and improve the quality of life. So a bit more about the carbon emissions in Hong Kong right now. This is taken from, I think, a year or two ago on the one of the policy papers I had on screen just then. Around 63% of the carbon emissions come from electricity generation, and from that 63%, there's 90% from buildings. If we look at that, that means how we use our buildings and how we design our buildings actually affect our overall emissions. The remaining 19% on transport, so we've gotten a lot about that as well. And the rest is just waste and miscellaneous others. That was the reason why the Hong Kong government said we need to transition from coal fire to, for example, natural gas, or preferably into renewables. Right now, they're actually thinking quite a lot on hydrogen energy. We've got the nuclear energy from Daya Bay. There's a lot of renewables going on in government buildings because of the requisite of having PV panels on their rooftops, or at least somehow including renewable generation from their government buildings. And we've got quite a few regulatory requirements and industry practices. First one is the Sustainable Building Design Guidelines, PNAP. So that is to do with how you design a building. For example, the setback distances, whether or not you can have airflow within the buildings, how comfortable the buildings are. And then there's the technical circular for green government buildings. So what I said just now on the requirement for gold for Beam Plus, EV charging, requiring, I think the latest one was to have like a light sensor, at least outdoor lighting requirements as well. And there's the Hong Kong Planning Standards and Guidelines. So that guideline is more of a general thing on how we design our urban cities. So how much green space we need to have, how much provisions we need, the building height, building setbacks. So these are the main industry requirements that we're working with, alongside with, for example, certifications. For example, the Beam Plus I've mentioned before, BREEAM infrastructure leads. So those type of things all come together to build up the overall the carbon reduction. So how do we integrate carbon management into the master planning? Knowing all this, knowing all the requirements, all the standards that we need to follow. And I'll be covering three major areas. First is the carbon management and building up the climate resilience, the actual strategies and tools and technologies, and how we deal with the embodied carbon right now. The relationship between carbon management and climate resilience is that I've mentioned just then, carbon actually is a major playing factor into climate resilience and climate impacts. To reduce greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, we are mitigating climate change impacts. And to do that, we need to build adaptive infrastructures, just in case we can't reduce all the impacts. And of course, we need to build up the long-term ecological balance. So there's a balance between nature and our urban environment, and how we make use of the environment, to ensure that we've got sustainable resources, to ensure that there are enough fuel for the future. This particular framework is actually because of the latest, or at least the upcoming government requirement to how to consider carbon and how to consider different smart initiatives to be integrated into our urban environment. These are grouped roughly into 3 different tiers. The first tier is to drive the driving initiatives under prevailing policies. What this means is it's like the status quo. What the policy states right now, we must do. And that's the tier 1. Tier 2 types of strategies are more project specific. A particular area that is ecologically sensitive, we might put more nature-based solutions in. An area that has more residential, we look at how to reduce carbon from energy use for cooling. So those types of things are more project specific. And then the third tier of initiatives we look at are more future things. So a couple of years ago, hydrogen was still like a concept, a research concept in the air. We were already thinking about how do we integrate this hydrogen energy into our cities? How do we integrate autonomous vehicle into our cities? What other infrastructures needed? So these are more future-looking, more innovative solutions. I've highlighted a couple of things that are quite common in our urban planning, master planning. So we've got the low carbon lifestyle. What this normally is walkability, thinking about walkability or alternative transport. We've got electric vehicles, waste reduction measures because we need to follow with the government guidelines, using prefabricated materials or MIC waste in which we can reduce waste, but also are in line with the industry practices, how to increase building efficiency, use of air, use of energy, how to improve airflow, cooling, etc. DCS, district cooling systems, so how to make the place easier to cool, or how do we incorporate a large cooling system inside our urban environment, and also urban green. So this is talking about open spaces, blue spaces, so that's parks and all that sort of things. So these are all what are the basis of our master plan right now. And that is every time we look at a master plan, it's like we have to think about this, we have to talk about these solutions. Next tier up, we've got the nature-based solutions. So as I said, for example, ecologically sensitive areas, we might look at how to integrate nature better into our environment, how to use digital solutions. So for example, lately I've got a project that is trying to make use of digital twin to do their planning, how to do optioneering. Renewable energy co-location, whether or not various renewable energy sources or different uses can be co-located together, and not all locations can, or at least not all development areas can actually use this. And urban farm, again, for example, you're not going to have an urban farm right in the middle of central, but rather you have it somewhere more rural, have a better place. So these are more project-specific solutions, and it varies between different projects. And then you've got the advanced technologies. And what those are is dependent on how much research we're normally doing. So as consultants, we actually have to be kept on track on what's the latest smart technologies or what the latest trend to sustainability is. Lately, it's still nature-based solutions. It's still on hydrogen. So we're trying to think up whether there are other use cases or whether there are other infrastructure that is needed to support or promote these uses. Some of the tools that we normally use for carbon management inside the urban planning. So this is more detail of what I've talked about in the tier 1 and 2. Mostly these are tier 1 things, because tier 2 is really project specific and it really depends on the location of our development areas. Site design and greening, it's more looking at the overall picture of the locations, how that development area sits inside the greater territory. Mobility, so this is to do with transport or how people move inside the city. Waste, this is to do with the waste production and waste treatment rather than reducing waste at source. What I mean is that we're trying to encourage positive behavior in waste disposal. Blue and green infrastructure is, again, looking at the wider development areas and the provisions. So green spaces, open spaces, blue spaces, and how we make use of these spaces to actually improve our resilience and adaptability. Energy is to do with the energy consumption and how we can make the best use of what we have. And then, of course, there's our general carbon appraise to make sure to actually do the different optioneering to actually support our different initiatives proposal. So the last one is more to do with how we can convince our clients to actually say, oh, this is a good solution that we're pushing towards a carbon neutral area, Hong Kong. With green design, we're generally focusing on 3 areas: the green certifications, green infrastructure, and the blue-green network. BEAM Plus and BREEAM is actually 2 major certifications that we're normally using in Hong Kong. BEAM Plus is a lot to do with the buildings themselves, whereas BREEAM infrastructure is to do with all the different types of infrastructure. And these, right now, there isn't any requirement for infrastructure to actually reduce their carbon or actually to have a certification in BREEAM. But a lot of the, at least Hong Kong Airport actually have been quite pushing towards the BREEAM infrastructure because they've been pressured to actually to become more carbon sensitive. BEAM Plus, a lot of buildings are using that. In Hong Kong, what we find is that using BREEAM infrastructure is quite difficult because this one is an international standard, whereas BEAM Plus has been tailored towards Hong Kong. So not a lot of, like, for example, roads and bridges don't use BREEAM infrastructure, but a lot of international locations actually do. Hong Kong government is trying to develop their own kind of infrastructure rating system to help guide the construction process along. Some of the green infrastructure that we're normally putting into our urban development, SUDS, so the sustainable urban drainage, is quite common because Hong Kong is so prone to heavy rains and flooding. Some, for example, the attenuation ponds or bioswales, so for ways in which we can collect the rainfall to make it like slowly seep back into the underground water to make it less impact. And then you've got the permeable paving as well. So permeable paving in, I think it was Poly, you actually had eco bricks that actually help with the permeable paving to actually have the seepage back into the groundwater. And all this is actually to help also improve the heat island effect and also improve the cooling efficiency because with the attenuation pond, you have a place for cooling. Bioswales and rain gardens are generally green areas in international locations. Most of these are actually quite well vegetated, so you've got good cooling along the pedestrian areas. There's also indoor farms as well as in terms of green infrastructure. What we want is that we want the place to be sustainable. And that's why we try to incorporate urban farms, or at least concepts of urban farming, not only to ensure that there's like a food supply, or at least some place to have a food supply, but also a place for the community to gather. So when we're talking about sustainability and carbon, we're not only just saying, oh, we need to put something there to reduce carbon. We want it to be used as well. So that's why indoor farms is a way to cut down, to actually provide a food source that is close by. When your food source is close by, you don't need as much transport, and therefore it's supposed to reduce the amount of carbon. But this would be dependent on how much food is produced. I think this one, the indoor farm down below, this one is from the one of the Tokyo offices, where they actually have I think it was 2 floors for food production, and that food production is enough to actually cater towards all the people eating within that building. You've got also vertical farms in Singapore that is hoping to increase the amount of yield in Singapore itself so that they don't have to import as much food into Singapore, thereby reducing the amount of transport costs and the related carbon. And of course, there's also green roof and vertical greening. So this is more of like how to improve the amount of green coverage we have in the cities to ensure that there are places, for example, urban sinks inside or carbon sinks inside urban areas, and to cool down our cities themselves. Green roof is quite sometimes problematic in older buildings because of the structural integrity of the building. So we can't exactly build a turf on the roof easily. But lately we've trying to incorporate more such greening solutions, not only on the roofs themselves, so on the side walls. A problem with the one with the vertical greening is water, because we need to water the vegetation on the walls. There are limited solutions to do so because we can't just put a hose up there. Hoses do block out, so that's why most of the time you see green walls that look really nice. When the building opens, it actually dries out. It's because of the infrastructure, and we're still trying to find solutions to how to ensure the longevity of vertical greening. The green roof is now becoming more of a PV roof because of what I mentioned before, the need for renewal. So we need to find a balance between how much green we want to have on the roof and how much energy generation we want to have on the roof. Urban forests and blue-green network, and this is to do with the actual carbon sinks inside our cities. In Hong Kong, there's limited space that we can actually create a very green network. In existing areas, for example, in existing urban, in the cities themselves, there's not much we can do to improve the amount of greenery, with the exception of actually using green roofs. But using green roofs, we don't have trees. What we want is to actually have parks or large spaces where we can plant enough trees to reduce the amount of carbon, at least by some amount. This is what a lot of the master planners are trying to do, is to think of ways we can make use of space the best we can to actually create these open spaces. And that's sometimes why the urban planning guideline actually says there's a requirement of how much urban space needs to be green, how much green space each person needs. I think it was 20 to 30% of green open spaces are required for the urban plan, and at least 2.5 square meters per person. So they must have that much open space. And how we make use of the open space is another challenge, because we need to provide the various facilities as well as providing the greenery for softscape and hardscape. Bioswales, storm. So these are the things we integrate inside of these open spaces. What we mean by green infrastructure, as I said, it's the green part. And they can be dedicated areas such as parks, or they can just be landscaped areas. So basically anything with green, that's what we call the green infrastructure. blue infrastructure might not just be rivers or ponds. There are also bioswales and stormwater management. So anything to do with blue water-ish things, we term those as blue infrastructure. Not all locations can integrate blue infrastructure into the urban plan. Places that are existing, that has existing drainage areas, for example, the Kwun Tong areas, so Kowloon East, where they revitalized the green, the blue areas around, I think it was the drainage. So those type of things that we're trying to incorporate into existing locations that we can't redo. Mobility is actually an easier concept to integrate into our urban master plans because people need to move around. In new development areas, we have a lot more leeway to figure out how we position the various stations and facilities to ensure permeability and to make it easier to move around and to incorporate different transport or movement types. In existing locations, it's a bit more difficult. So what we do in existing locations, for example, if we want to redevelop, let's say, Kwun Tong area, how do we incorporate initiatives to reduce the amount of cars on the road? So those are the things that we think about in existing locations. In new locations, for example, the Northern Territories or Northern Metropolis, we would look at how we position the different government buildings or stations or business areas to make it easier for people to move around and easier for them to take alternative movement transports or movement patterns. In the concept of town planning, so a lot of the carbon emissions come from private cars. And then you've got the normal goods vehicles, buses and taxis and all that sort of stuff. So in town planning, we're trying to reduce the number of cars on road in general. But what we're actually wanting to do is reduce the number of emissions from private cars. With electric vehicles upcoming, it's not as difficult because now we can say, oh, let's provide charging stations to encourage electrical vehicle use rather than the combustion-based vehicles. We actually need to look at how to improve traffic conditions to reduce the environmental impact. So green transport is not just an environmental side of things, there's also the economical side. We reduce the reliance on fossil fuel. That means it's easy. We need to increase the EV production to actually encourage the EV economics. But at the same time, we're actually reducing the amount of impacts from fossil fuels. So all of these are actually interlinked and not just say we're doing it for the sake of reducing carbon. These are the plans that I've mentioned before, so the Climate Action Plan 2050. The roadmap on the electric vehicles is actually quite, it actually does give a lot of guidance to us right now. But at the same time, it's now quite dated, unfortunately. But there are continuous updates to technical notes saying what we need to provide. One of the concepts we typically use is a transport-oriented city. This means that it's easy for people to actually move using public transport and that everything is within walking distance from residential areas. Business areas would be focused around particular stations, so ensuring that there's commercial activity. At the same time, there's also residential areas supporting these business businesses and economic activities. So in theory, they don't need to move around as much, and everything would be contained inside this particular station, or at least around a particular station. A good example would be in Hong Kong, right? It would be in Sha Tin, where they plan to, previously when they were planning, they have the Sha Tin station at the center. You've got economic activities around, and then surrounding that, you've got the residential areas. So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about transit-oriented city. And from there, it's connected to another location through the rail network. And it makes it easier for people to move without having to be dependent on private cars. The new modern urban model is to make it healthier and to create more compact cities. So we're increasing the densities of the cities themselves and creating what we call the 15-minute city. The 15-minute city is actually saying within 15 minutes you can get to wherever you need. For example, you can get into work within 15 minutes using either public transport or by walking or cycling. You can go to health services within 15 minutes. You've got all the community facilities, social welfare facilities within that 15 minutes. And because we're trying to make it more compact, it makes it slightly easier to incorporate ideas such as super blocks and car-free cities. These are typically linked together because super blocks, we're trying to build a big chunk of area that's saying this is a walking only, pedestrian only area, and we're limiting the amount of cars coming into this particular block. Of course, this doesn't mean that all cars are banned into these super blocks. Emergency vehicles or particular grades of vehicles would be allowed just to make sure that that particular area actually can be operated and that there'll be use within that area. So this was what I was talking about just then. What the 15-minute neighborhood is. Within 5 minutes, in theory, you should be able to walk to typically where you need. For example, you can within 5 minutes walk into the station to actually go somewhere else. A 15-minute walk, you can get into, for example, the supermarkets. You can buy food. You can go to the doctors. Of course, you can actually go by bike, and 15 minutes by bike would take you further as well. And then, of course, there's the 15 minutes by public transport, which takes you perhaps to the next city. So we're trying to improve both walkability and the use of, at least reduce the reliance on private cars. The features of 15 minutes neighborhood, you've got local shopping centers and healthcare facilities. Schools and learning opportunities within 15-minute cities are actually quite important as well. So schools, it's not only the primary and secondary schools, but also kindergartens. Lifelong learning opportunities would be, for example, tertiary education or TAFE or training schools, etc. Within the 50 minutes, you should also have these green spaces, community spaces and playgrounds for people to actually relax. And then, of course, there's also different houses. So affordable houses, public houses, as well as private housing. You've got the aging facilities there as well, making it easier to walk to different locations, making it easier to cycle, for example. These are all the various different features that we're incorporating within that so-called 15-minute neighborhood. And in new development areas, there might be several different 15-minute neighborhoods, so depending on the size of the development areas. Lately, the one that I am doing, I think there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, there's around 6 to 7 different 15-minute neighborhoods, each with their individualities, you can say. Some are more focused on the aging population, the silver population, so there's a lot more community facilities or doctors and clinics in that area, as well as aging homes. So designing a particular 15-minute area to suit a particular persona. There's another one that's more focused on the commercial side. So those would be tailored towards the businesses. For example, you've got 15 minutes walk to the various offices, to public transport, and also to retail. Then there's for example, a promenade or places for them to relax. So the features of the 15-minute neighborhood can be dependent on the different characteristics you want it to show. With autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, that when we're trying to incorporate into the city, we need to think about how they're operated. Right now, the projection is that there'll be around 3,000 electric taxis on the road, along with 700 electric buses on the road. So with these electric vehicles, you'd need the corresponding infrastructure. The Hong Kong government has been incorporating different infrastructure for the popularization of electrical buses and taxis. So not only do they have the charging, but they also put out the roadmap of how to roll them out. For example, lately the new taxi licenses, those they've actually have a couple of electrical taxis themselves. There's also the trial of autonomous vehicles, so to encourage more electrical vehicle use, because autonomous vehicles generally actually are electrical vehicles. Right now, I think there's one running along in the Science Park, and I think it was in West Kowloon as well. So Hong Kong has been, I think there's around 5 trials overall that's ongoing, or at least upcoming. Some of the autonomous vehicles that's been tested in Hong Kong, so you've got, and this is from the Transport Department website. They've actually posted how many trials are ongoing, which types of cars have been trialed on Hong Kong roads, how they're doing, etc. Some of the provisions that we're looking at when we're talking about electrical vehicles. So charging, you've seen the normal charging stations, but internationally there's also alternative ways of charging. For example, using the overhead charger. So when buses come across to, for example, parking at stations, waiting to drop off passengers, we can consider those places as charging locations. We can incorporate chargers on the road, so kind of like a wireless charging network all across our new roads. In Hong Kong, it's not used right now. These the overhead or built-in charging. It's because of there's no need for them right now. A lot of the buses or taxis are still using the plugs to actually do charging. So we're looking more on how we incorporate these standalone chargers to ensure that they can actually run on the road. The government building, so this is the screen cap of the technical note on government green buildings. They've renewed it, I think it was 2 years ago, I think. Yeah, so this is the 2023, yeah. So this one was the one that they're saying, oh, you now need to incorporate not only normal chargers, but fast chargers inside our government buildings to make sure that any electrical vehicles coming in, they'll have the place to charge. Alternative fuels are actually, you can consider them as an advanced technology. It's not so much used right now in Hong Kong because not so much is known about them. What we've managed to get together is that there are biodiesel cars or buses operating in Hong Kong, at least one of them, for, I think it was a school bus, and that was more of an on trial. But the problem is that the amount of biofuel produced is very limited. And most of the time, if we want to actually use it in a larger scale, it'll have a lot of problems. For example, how we can actually source the materials to create these biofuels. Hydrogen buses are being on trial, and I'm sure you've heard from the news that there's the hydrogen station using town gas to provide the hydrogen for the hydrogen bus. And we're looking at how to incorporate these hydrogen buses into our master planning as well. The thing that a lot of the master plan would look at is how to convert the existing fueling locations, for example, fuel stations, to be usable for hydrogen, because there's quite a lot of safety concerns with hydrogen as well. For example, how we source it, how we store them, how it's transported into the stations themselves. Those are the types of things we need to think about. And with existing locations of fueling stations, because they have a lot of the infrastructure and hardware already installed, there's quite a lot of concerns when trying to convert them into hydrogen stations. New development areas, we're actually saying a particular location must be hydrogen. And when we're looking at that particular location, we need to say how much setback from the residential areas it must be, how far away, what types of things can be located around that particular station. So those things we need to consider when we're enabling this hydrogen bus to actually travel through our urban locations. At the same time, because some of the planning actually is involved with existing locations, we want to make it easier for people to move around. One way of doing that is using digital solutions. So e-mobility platforms, for example, most of you would have a transport-related app on your phones just to say how to get from point A to point B. In Hong Kong, this is more of a convenience. Other locations, it's more to do with trying to reduce the amount of cars or private vehicles. Hong Kong, because we're a densely populated city, we've got very, very good and very convenient public transport. We're quite used to taking MTR, buses. Those type of things are built into us. But in places such as Australia, in England, in US, where there's urban sprawl, people are actually living farther away from the metropolis, they're more reliant on private vehicles. E-mobility platforms are trying to transition these types of people back into using public transport, or at least kind of like a group or not Uber, but carpooling type of thing. And with e-mobility transport, one good thing is that we can actually see where there are higher usage. Using Internet of Things or sensors, we can actually track how people move, or at least where there are most people getting on and off. Because of the various sensors, we can see, oh, there's a higher population here, or because of our mobile phones, we can actually see the congestion. So when we're looking at mobility platforms, we need to think about what types of access they need. Public transport, on-demand sharing, ride sharing, those kind of like the public transport for everyone to use. So we're trying to focus the mobility platforms on these mass transit, whereas individual users for Uber, for shared riding, or car sharing, scooters, those type of things, it's still considered as a way to actually reduce the amount of cars, but not ideal, you can say, because we're, for example, with cars, if we're not an electric vehicle, it's still a carbon emission. And where when we're looking at it, we'd say, yes, you might reduce the amount of private car ownership, but at the same time, there's still a car on the road. That's why with bike sharing or scooter sharing, those are more of like a preferable way of movement. And with the platforms, with the infrastructure, we're hoping to actually create a better environment to actually use these bikes and use these scooters. Let's see, I think. Yeah, so these, I've just pulled up two, you can say, kind of common platforms for urban mobility. So at the top one, you've got like the mobility platform that integrates the various different modes of transport. So not only is it just focused, for example, on buses, it'll be the user would be able to actually use the single app to say, I take this bus, and then, for example, I need to move to a place without the bus stops that's further away from the bus stop. I can transition into another mode quite easily, quite quickly, without having to move in between different apps. So, for example, you don't have to use the Kowloon Motor Bus app to actually make sure you're on the bus on time and then transition to a MTR app to say when the next train would be coming.
Imagine not having multiple bills for your travel expenses, especially if you own a car. Imagine never being stranded, not knowing how to get from A to B. Now there's a solution. Ubigo, to simplify your everyday life. Ubigo combines all modes of transportation, all in one app, all on one invoice. Simple pricing with no fixed fees or lock-ins. And you share Ubigo with your family. Ubigo is live in Stockholm. Join the ride.
So you can see that it's trying to make it easier for people to actually move from place to place without having to move between different applications, or at least make the whole journey smoother without having to start and stop and go. One of my latest projects is actually involved in something similar to that, and that would be trying to encourage better movement between locations. And how we do that is to make it easier for people to locate themselves, to be able to move from one place to another without actually using private vehicles and making it smoother transition. It's a way in which we can manage carbon as well. With low emission, and we can incorporate that into, like, for example, the low emission zones or the super blocks I was talking about earlier. And in these zones, we're limiting the number or types of cars and vehicles going into a particular city. For example, only electrical vehicles can go into into the inner area. Those heavy goods vehicles might have to drop outside of these areas and then transition into, for example, electrical vehicles to actually do their last mile delivery. And to actually transition these people into these low emission zones, we would need green modes of transport. Cycling is one of the easiest, I would say, the easiest way to actually move about. Of course, there's also scooters. The problem with these is that you need to have the policies in place to make it easy for them to cycle. In Hong Kong, there's a requirement to wear helmets when you're cycling, or at least for the safety of yourself, you need to wear helmets. These types of hardware, not everyone would have like on hand. For example, right now I don't have a helmet, but I want to ride a bike. How would I do that? I think it was in Germany that they have a trial before to actually rent a cardboard helmet, and you can actually ride directly. So right next to the bike locations, you've got a helmet rental location, you'll call it. That makes it easier for them to actually take up bike riding to get from point A to point B. with the low emission zones, we also need to consider how we do delivery. I said before, the heavy goods vehicles or the diesel vehicles can't go into a boundary within the city. So how would they actually make the deliveries into the cities themselves? This is where we have the urban consolidation centers. So we're trying to bring all the heavy vehicles into one location and have that single location be the distribution point. And from there, you can actually, for example, use autonomous vehicles or drones to do the final last mile delivery. A good reason to do that is actually to reduce, not only to reduce the carbon emissions within the particular cities themselves, but it also makes it easier for management. So here, let's see, the bottom left-hand corner. So you can see before we have individual suppliers supplying their office materials, building materials to each individual construction site or each individual government offices. With a consolidated center, you can have all the office materials delivered to a single place. And for example, you have like 3 deliveries every day just to go from office ABC. So you can do a single delivery rather than having multiple deliveries. And this is especially good if you're having to deliver, for example, bricks to 3-4 different locations. That means you'll need to go 3-4 different times between the manufacturer, or at least the manufacturer need to have 3-4 different trucks going out from their locations to the different construction sites. With a consolidated center, it will be the supplier putting everything into the consolidated area, and then from the consolidated area, they might have scheduled deliveries to the various sites. So it makes it easier to manage the fleet, as well as making it perhaps a bit cheaper as well, because you don't need, the suppliers won't have to travel as much, or at least waste as many resources to source all the different trucks. The latest policy address is actually promoting low altitude economy. I remember when I first started with Arup, this was considered as an advanced technology. We look at how to the first thing we look at was why we should encourage the use of drones. And one of the things we saw was that, it was because drones use electricity and we can source green energy for electricity, reducing carbon. That's why we're promoting the use of drones, or at least UAVs, to do short deliveries. But one of the things that's a drawback for us was there's not enough infrastructure and not enough policies to support this. With the latest policy address, there's now a push towards low altitude economy for deliveries, because it's just so popular right now. And of course, you've probably seen a lot of news from China saying how easy it is. But at the same time, we need to consider the various nuisance from these drones. In Australia, they tried it out for short deliveries. I think it was for coffee in one of the from a rural area, from a town, and it was because there's a lot of noise, a lot of that were distracting the residents, that they had to put a stop to it ultimately. And until there's better technologies, then it's really hard to actually push forth this low altitude economy. In China, they've got this one. This was the one. In China, they've built up a good system, you can say, for low altitude economy, because they've got a lot of the different stops for drones inside areas that's more populated, or at least outside of the residential areas. For example, on rooftops or in parks where it's just normal to see a drone flying in. And with these drones, if we're supplying it with green energy, it actually helps reduce the amount of trucks on the road as well. Any short-term, the last mile delivery can now be easier and quicker without having to be reliant on truck delivery.
In the southern Chinese tech city, Shenzhen, your next takeout lunch could be delivered by drone. More and more companies are using the low-flying robots to help with last-mile delivery services, with food orders being especially convenient.
I work in a nearby office building. When I first heard about the drone delivery service, I didn't know where the kiosks were and how to pick up the deliveries. Then my colleagues explained everything to me. It's really convenient.
Couriers collect the orders from the restaurants and drop them off at a launch pad. They're processed, boxed, and attached to a drone that delivers it to a kiosk, usually on the top of an office building. Chinese shopping platform Meituan, one of the first companies to launch drone food deliveries, said the idea isn't to replace delivery people, but to make their work more efficient.
In fact, we are upgrading, not substituting the traditional delivery process. Compared with the traditional way of delivering food, we can basically cut delivery time by half.
Drones are also being used to transport medical supplies and other packages in cities where civil unmanned airspace has been opened for commercial use.
So in Hong Kong, there's actually another problem with the drones themselves. Not only is the locations a problem, we also have the policies, regulations restricting where we fly the drones. In the trial in Science Park is because they've relaxed slightly because it's managed privately. So Science Park actually said we want to test these drones, therefore we can actually allow them to fly. But in urban areas of Hong Kong, there are strict restrictions on where we can actually fly the drones, how high we can fly them, and how near to a pedestrian area we can fly these drones. And to fly them, you of course need to have the license to fly them. And that's why it's still being tried out at more, you can say, rural locations, whilst we're trying to figure out a way to ensure both the safety of the pedestrians underneath these flying drones, as well as providing the infrastructure to ensure, for example, they have landing pads or charging locations. The last mobility aspect that we look at is underground parking. Underground parking is not so much as a carbon reduction measure, but it's more of trying to reduce the number of cars on road, so making it easier for any sort of road travel. What normally happens is people park on the side of the road. It creates a narrower road access, making it higher opportunity for congestion, more cars on road. So it's kind of like you create a bottleneck of vehicles, and then there's more vehicles sitting there, switching on their engines, waiting for the next stoplight. And these underground car parks are trying to make these parking on road to be located elsewhere. We've got underground car parks easily, but with underground car park, the manual underground car park is that you need a place for people to move about as well. What we're looking at is how to autonomize this action. So I think Sham Shui Po has an autonomous car park on trial before, or is it the EMST has another autonomous parking lot on trial that stacks the cars to make the single space more usable for car parking. Oh, yeah, I'll skip that one because that's pretty long. But overall, with mobility, we look for, from an urban planning perspective, we look at these 9 kind of strategies. So the integrated public transport e-mobility platform that I've talked to make it easier to transit between the different transport types or movement types. You've got the transport-oriented development, electric buses that need the infrastructure, supporting infrastructure as well as policies, bicycles and green mode of transport. So green mode of transport is not only for bicycles, but also for scooters as well. Low emission zones, reducing the cost and requirements of battery by induction power. This one is more of an electrical vehicle, how to make it easier for them to do charging. Underground parking is to reduce the number of cars on roads. Green transport concepts, so making it easier for the transport to move, and also the Green Consolidation Center. But supporting this is also community individual initiatives. So these aren't what we normally plan for inside the master plan, but what we hope to achieve with the master plan. But most of this is more of a soft side, kind of individual or business policy focus. For example, shared use EcoDrive, when we can enable it with the e-mobility platform. However, telecommunicating, staggered working hours, and company travel plans, these are more of like the soft side per businesses. But what we're trying to do with an urban plan or urban master plan is to encourage these things. So for example, encouraging telecommuting with the use of smart technologies, encouraging people to use staggered work hours through easier planning of travel from e-mobility platforms. So those type of things are more of a community individuals initiatives. I think, is that good? Yeah, I think this would be a good place to do a quick break. So around 10 minutes, yeah, around 10 minutes. So around 8 o'clock, I think. Yeah. Okay, so we'll begin again. It's still on the topic of the various tools and technologies we use in urban planning or master planning, and this time we'll be focusing on waste and how we treat waste, or how we treat the collection and disposal of waste rather than how it's generated. Integrated facilities, so such as iPark, T-Park, O-Park, whatever park is, upcoming parks that's coming up for the government. Those types of locations, we're trying to bring the various different refuse or waste together to create something new. In this one, it's in Copenhagen. What they did is the waste to energy, WTE, waste to electricity facility. So around 400 tons of waste is processed in this facility annually, and electricity, the electricity generated from this particular facility can be used for heating for around 150,000 homes. One of the characteristics of this particular facility is that it's not only a waste to energy facility, it's also a landmark and a community facility. So right at the bottom left corner, this is one of a conceptual diagram of what this particular integrated facility has. It's got like these various leisure activities built into the sloped areas, built into the general community areas to bring the local community together to as a place of gathering for social activities, for actual sports. So what these locations are is we're not trying to design a place for one single use. We're trying to make it multiple use as well. Automatic refuse collection system is a way in which we can reduce the number of trucks or collection vehicles on roads by the use of pipes or underground network, or even within the vertical building themselves, to collect all the waste together, to sort it in a centralized location, and then to bring it to, for example, recycling centers, or to a distribution point for transfer to landfill. Let's see. So the automatic refuse systems, we can actually incorporate that with the low emission zones or zero emission zones. We can gather, for example, the trash to just on the outskirts of cities, making it less, making it more environmental area, a very good environment for the people to actually walk in, rather than having waste vehicles traveling all around. The example that we had just now actually incorporates a smart card to actually track the use or recycling of the residents themselves. So each resident at that particular neighborhood would be issued a card, or at least each household would be issued with a card to actually tap on, for example, the particular bins they want to use. So we can track the amount of waste or recyclables from that location. In Hong Kong, we actually trial out a smart waste management system that is similar in concept, where we actually put in sensors inside bins to make it easier for us to track which bins need to be emptied. So for better fleet management, to reduce the number of trucks on the road and make it more easier for people to actually recycle. Because one of the things that's hindering recycling, or at least the positive behavior, is that you go to a recycling bin, it's already been filled with, for example, filled up with bottles, for plastic bottles. It deters people from wanting to put more plastic bottles inside that recycling bin, and in the end it's thrown into a normal bin, which then goes to the landfill. With these smart systems, we know when they are filled up, or at least we can predict when they fill up. We can then send the vehicle out to actually collect these waste in real time, and to reduce the amount of recyclables in that bin to make it easier for people to use. And this was trialed out in East Kowloon a couple of years ago on a couple of school locations. So we actually managed to monitor the amount of waste, the amount of recyclables, that's when it will fill up. But unfortunately, because of the contract they had with the collectors, they weren't able to actually do the real-time fleet management. Rather, we can actually monitor which type of recyclables is which type of waste is being recycled the most, whether or not we actually need to provide more of that particular type of bin, or do more, for example, more education programs on how to recycle glass or something like that. In Singapore, and I think in Barcelona as well, both of them using the sensors, as well as Singapore having a incentive for people to recycle. I mean, in Hong Kong, we actually do similar thing with the green community. Is it called the green community centers? So we have these incentives programs to encourage positive behavior. So when we're looking at waste, we're not reducing the actual amount of waste produced, but rather we're trying to encourage behavior. Similarly, we can integrate other sort of technologies inside waste-related vehicles or waste-related services. GPS tracking of these disposal trucks help us to do fleet management. RFID tagging, for example, for on bags or within the touch cards, we can track the use or how it's not utilized, or whether we need to provide more of a particular type of bin. Another aspect is the food waste management in Hong Kong. Food waste from, we as Hong Kong people would do actually throw a lot of food away, both in, for example, the restaurants or by ourselves in our own homes. Reduction of food waste, a long time ago, probably before any of us were actually born, they would collect waste from kitchen, so peels and bones and all those sort of stuff. They would collect it as sewage to be treated elsewhere. As we progress, these more now become just general waste we throw in the bins. Now we go back to eons ago and say we need to do recycling on these food waste, and how we do that is trying to make it easier for people to collect these food waste together to be treated. On the road or inside general residential areas, there's the green community recycling bins. In public residential communities, the government has been trying out to incorporate the biodigestion machines inside. I think it was in the basement areas or in areas farther away from actual residential homes, but still located within the neighborhood, to make it easier for people to throw away their food waste and not just throwing into the bins. And these food waste can be used, for example, as fertilizers in local gardens or local landscape areas. So they are not actually just waste, and the bioenergy they generate could be used for other means as well. So this one is just how Australia is trying to deal with food-based waste by making it easier for the restaurants to collect everything together and process it within a single facility. In Hong Kong, we don't exactly have, we have one, I think it was the Old Park, that actually help treat these types of food waste into making it into some, at T Park, sorry. TPUC is the one that transform these into energy and for the heating of the pools. So the food waste is not just a fertilizer, rather it's trying to be created as a energy in Hong Kong because we don't need that much fertilizer.
O'Hara is team leader at the Grave Street recycling facility. Today, I'm going to give him a hand collecting and processing a whole heap of laneway leftovers. The system, which is a joint project between Melbourne City Council and Citywide, is an Australian first. Up on laneway level, cafes and restaurants sort their waste into 3 different tubs. One for food waste, another for coffee grounds, and a third for recyclables. Then it's simply a case of bring out your waste. Since the facility launched in 2013, it has diverted 392 tonnes of food and recycling from landfill.
Here's the next trailer we're visiting.
In a year, this system diverts over 130,000 kilos of food waste along it.
Pretty easy system.
Yes, it is.
It's good.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you.
The recycling team makes several pickups a day from these inner city laneways. And there's no extra cost for the businesses to be involved. Back at the basement facility, the food waste is loaded into this machine.
It's not that smelly. I thought
It's not,
it surprises everyone.
It uses a process called aerobic digestion to completely break down the waste.
These are recycled plastic beads, and they help like cut up the food waste.
Yeah.
And that with like an actual microorganism gets sprayed in and helps break it down, kind of like the way the human stomach does. So it goes through our grease trap for final removal of contaminants.
Yeah.
And then our water comes out. And underground it's treated so it meets all our regulations with Trade-offs water.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So hang on a sec, so is the end product water that goes out, or is that just water? Oh wow, can't believe it. So it actually really breaks down into liquid for
And
this.
it'll just keep breaking it down until there's nothing left. Yeah. So we can tip it in, and it's not, this is the bit that gets a bit messy.
See, well, there's a lot of avocados. Everyone's getting smashed avocado.
These paddles start moving when the door closes, so once we close it,
Yeah.
you'll hear it spray, and that's the organism starting to work, as you can hear now.
Yeah.
It's working. In a couple of minutes, we'll be able to identify what we put in. It starts breaking down really quickly. And then after an hour, there's going to be nothing left of what we put in there.
The wastewater is pumped to the Werribee Water Treatment Facility, where elements are extracted to create biogas that's used to make energy.
Pretty interesting, eh?
Sure.
Yeah. Yep.
The coffee grounds are sent to a dehydrator and heated to 170 degrees, where they eventually emerge as a high-quality soil conditioner for community gardens and council parks.
It was a disaster for years. There was no waste separation going on at all.
Yeah.
And so now it's this community effort to try and make an example. And we're getting delegations and members of parliament from all over the world coming to visit here.
Better to see food waste being turned into this and
Yeah.
wastewater or whatever, rather than actually just going into landfill,
Yeah.
where no one gets any good out of it. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in Hong Kong, we actually have some policies, not policies, but we have some directions in place. Link Riad is actually a very good example because in their markets right now, they actually collect all the food wastage from the various counters into a single location and process it. Various different coffee locations provide coffee grounds for use in community gardens. So we're slowly trying to transition into not just dumping the waste, but rather we're actually using the waste themselves as something else. But there's still quite a far way to go because there's still, for example, restaurants or buffet locations. Those areas are where there's the most amount of food wastage that's still not being treated because there's no single location or no convenient location for them to gather all these waste resources to be turned into something else. From waste, we now turn back into the blue-green infrastructure. I've previously alluded to what the blue infrastructure is and what the green infrastructure is, and what that means is just what's blue and what's green. On screen right now is some of the various infrastructure that's used inside urban locations. For example, we've got the Eco River Channel. So Tree Ping River is a very good example. where we actually created a very nice landscape for not only flooding or a rise in water, but also it's a good community space. They've also done the same in Korea, where we've got a very nice river area for people to play, for people to gather, at the same time being able to gather the various rainwaters or gather runoff into a location in cases of heavy rain. Retention lakes, bioswales, so those are all the various places that to gather the rainwater. Water harvesting is one of the ways in which we can reuse water, rainwater, not only to gather it, but also as a resource to be used. Green roof, rain garden, porous pavement actually goes into the retention tank to make it easier to flow away from our cities, to improve the climate resilience or adaptations of our cities. So the Cheng, I'm going to butcher this, but the Cheongryung Stream Park, that's the one in Korea. So you can see they not only incorporated the blue elements, but also the green elements and the community elements, creating space for visitors and residents alike to gather, to hold events, or at least to make a very nice area to take a photograph. Bioswales are quite common in places like Australia and Europe and America, just along the residential street side, as a way to collect rain, or whenever it rains in Australia, but a way to make the rain flow from the roads to vegetated locations. They may not have the drainage underneath, but at least it's a place to gather the water and not make it flood into the residential homes. Permeable pavers, this is one of the older style of permeable paving, where we actually integrated, where we have like turfs or grassy areas interspaced with concrete or non-porous areas, just to make the water flow slightly easier. But right now, I think it was PolyU which started it, was the actual porous brick that lets rain seep into the drainage system. Rain garden is another, just a place for water to gather, not so much as a drainage, not so much as connecting to a drainage, but just to make it so that the runoff can gather into a single strip. So the forest park down below, that is in, I think it was in Thailand, where they identified a location where it's prone to flooding. So they transformed that area to make it more green, at the same time to transform the area to make it so that the rain actually has some place to go, rather than just flooded the whole city. With sustainable urban drainage, we need to integrate it into the cities themselves, especially in residential locations. So I mentioned before, in Australia and Europe and Americas, where we actually integrate bioswales and rain gardens next to the roadside, is because not all of the areas have good drainage. And a lot of the times, they're not fully equipped to handle heavy rains, especially with climate change, where we get heavier rainfalls, longer rainfalls. The drainage system might clog. That's why we have these rain gathering locations where we can make use of the soil themselves to soak back up the rainwater to repopulate the groundwater. So these are some of the, these are other examples, porous pavement, and then you've got the tree planter boxes that can integrate like the various porous elements to actually help it drain back into below the concrete paving. Tree planter units. The Buffalo Bayou Park, this one, is an example of what happened during the heavy rainfall. I think it was the Harvey, I think that was a typhoon in, a cyclone in America. On the left-hand corner, upper left, that was before Harvey strike in America. It's still green space. It's just a nice park for people to get together. When Harvey hit, it was filled to the brim with water, but it didn't impact on any nearby community facilities or residential area, because this park was actually created below the at a valley, so you can get the water to be collected there and not flow towards the main seas themselves. And because they managed to gather all the water, it makes it easier for the cleanup afterwards. They can quickly revert back to the park within, I think this was how many months? 8 months. At least within 2 months, they can actually have access. The third month, most of the things were cleaned. And then by 8 months, the vegetation came back. So it managed to function both as a place for community and as a safe location. District cooling system is a method that we've used for the past 2-3 years to make cooling more efficient. So what it is that there's a central chiller plant that takes in water, and that takes in chilled water, which is then pumped into the different commercial residential locations with the heat exchange to as like a coolant for the local air cooling unit, which then pumps the cool air out, and the hot water goes back into the chiller plant. So this is how the district cooling system works. So we've got the single chiller plant to handle the cooling of the water, and the water is transported to other locations to chill the air. Compared to the individually air-cooled systems, so the general cooling systems, it's around 35%, it uses 35% less energy. And that's the air-cooled. And for the water-cooled, it's around 20%. So in theory, we can save the energy used to cooling and thus reducing the carbon. At the same time, because we only have one single location, one single unit to do this heat transfer, it has less impact in terms of noise to the surroundings. The Kai-Tak development DCS is said to have reduced at least 35% of the energy use. Reported from their website was that they had managed to cool around 19 user buildings, around 750 meters square of cooling area. And this is the this is one single large building for the whole of Kai-Tak area. So you can imagine if all that area each have their own individual air conditioning, the amount of energy used would be quite a lot. In urban planning, we've planned for, these are a couple of locations that is currently considering or is planning or is under construction for the district cooling system. The Kutong North District Cooling is currently under construction, and it's supposedly to save up to 42 million kilowatts of electricity annually and reducing 29,000 tons per year. Similarly with this one, in Tongchung East, saving 31 million kilowatt hours and 21,000 tons of carbon. So these two are currently under construction. The thing with these DCS is it used to be run by EMSD. So they're the ones who's supposed to run it, to construct it, to make sure that it's managed properly. But with recent development, they're saying it doesn't have to be government run. It could be with private development. So what they're doing is that they're encouraging other property owners to either, for example, develop their own DCS or at least a similar system to make it easier to cool the area rather than having each individual commercial location having their own chiller system. And these two that are currently planned, that's what they're planning to do. They're trying to push for more private investment to come in, private investors to adopt these so-called DCS. Smart grid is not so much used in Hong Kong, but in other international locations, for example, in Australia, they are pushing for smart grids. And that was because they can incorporate renewable energy use alongside with the smart grid. Before we have the smart grid, energy just flows from the station through the transmission lines into the different transmission locations and into the customers. And what they found in UK was that at certain times or at certain events, there would always be a sudden spike in electricity. Without a smart grid, normally what would happen is that because of this spike, this unforeseen spike, the energy struts down. There's not enough energy to go about. You can see these two one spike and one drop. The spike happened when the Super Bowl actually was at halftime, and everyone was rushing to the kitchen to boil a cup of tea, a cup of coffee or whatever. Suddenly, everyone's turning on their kettles, and then you've got a spike, and that made it really hard for energy companies to manage how much energy to output. And then you've got the drop, where everyone suddenly saying, okay, someone's won, everyone's going out to celebrate, no one's watching the TV anymore, they're turning off their lights, so you've got the sudden drop. Being able to actually manage when to provide and how much to provide energy makes it less likely to waste the amount of energy. So we're not wasting coal or wasting energy to produce more electricity that's not going to be used and that can't be stored.
Our current electric grid was conceived more than 100 years ago when electricity needs were simple. Power generation was localized and built around communities. Most homes had only small energy demands, such as a few light bulbs and a radio. The grid was designed for utilities to deliver electricity to consumers' homes and then bill them once a month. This limited one-way interaction makes it difficult for the grid to respond to the ever-changing and rising energy demands of the 21st century. The smart grid introduces a two-way dialogue where electricity and information can be exchanged between the utility and its customers. It's a developing network of communications, controls, computers, automation, and new technologies and tools working together to make the grid more efficient, more reliable, more secure, and greener. This smart grid enables newer technologies to be integrated, such as wind and solar energy production and plug-in electric vehicle charging. With our participation as informed consumers, this smart grid will replace the aging infrastructure of today's grid, and utilities can better communicate with us to help manage our electricity needs. The smart home communicates with the grid and enables consumers to manage their electricity usage. By measuring a home's electricity consumption more frequently through a smart meter, utilities can provide their customer with much better information to manage their electricity bills. Inside the smart home, a home area network, or HOM, connects smart appliances, thermostats, and other electric devices to an energy management system. Smart appliances and devices will adjust their run schedule to reduce electricity demand on the grid at critical times and lower consumers' energy bills. These smart devices can be controlled and scheduled over the web or even a TV. Renewable resources, such as wind and solar, are a sustainable and growing source for electric power. However, renewable power sources are variable by nature and add complexity to normal grid operations. The smart grid provides the data and automation needed to enable solar panels and wind farms to put energy onto the grid and optimize its use. To keep up with constantly changing energy demands, utilities must turn power plants on and off depending on the amount of power needed at certain times of the day. The cost to deliver power depends on the time of day it is used. Electricity is more costly to deliver at peak times because additional, often less efficient power plants must be run to meet the higher demand. The smart grid will enable utilities to manage and moderate electricity usage with the cooperation of their customers, especially during peak demand times. As a result, utilities will be able to reduce their operating costs. By deferring electricity usage away from peak hours and having appliances and devices run at other times, electricity production is more evenly distributed throughout the day. The power being used right now was generated less than a second ago many miles away. At each instance, the amount of electricity generated must equal the consumption across the entire grid. Smart grid technologies provide detailed information that enables grid operators to see and manage electricity consumption in real time. This greater insight and control reduces outages and lowers the need for peak power. In control rooms across the grid, engineers will be able to more precisely and predictably manage electricity production, reducing the need to fire up costly secondary power plants.
So that's just a quick introduction of what the smart grid is. In Hong Kong, we trialed out similar concept of smart grid through energy monitoring by the consumers themselves. So in Kai Tak area, I think it was in the East Kowloon area, a couple of the communities were chosen to actually to install particular monitoring devices onto their own the plugs to monitor how they use the energy and to see what their demands are, and to actually schedule themselves when to use electricity. Hong Kong isn't so much restricted. I remember back in Australia when I was living there, there are quite high costs to using electricity during the day. So from around 12 noon to around 12 or 1 o'clock in the evening, or 1 o'clock in the morning. So those type of times, it's when it's the peak hours, the cost is a lot. And afterwards, it's actually reduced by around 25%. So being able to not only adjust from the operator side, from the consumer side, being able to know when to use electricity not only helps with the environment, but also help my pocket. In Australia, why I put this Australian smart grid project up is because they've also pushed for residential locations to install PVs on their roof. One good thing is that this push towards being able to install these PV panels is that they can actually generate income. Integrated with the smart grid, we can not only provide energy back into the system, but the operators themselves can say, oh, we can actually extract, where we can extract more energy or where we need to provide more energy. So being able to not only monitor and schedule our own energy use, the power companies also can monitor to actually collect energy, you can say, and make it easier to deliver the renewable energy to other locations. So they can collect, for example, energy from location A, store it in the batteries. From the battery, they can transmit it out to another location. We now come to the you can say final part of the master planning, where we try to justify why we do what we do. So carbon appraisal for master planning. Normally we look at it from two different levels. One is from a master planning level, and one is from the individual infrastructure and building level. In the master building level is what I mentioned, all the various different tools and all the different strategies we use, how to reduce carbon emissions during not only operation, but also during construction. How we actually schedule our construction to make it flow easier and to make sure that we don't waste things. For example, we don't create too much wastage materials when we're buildings. And this is where the digital tools sometimes come in, is to help us manage how we build certain buildings, how we schedule our materials, and how we manage to schedule the different machineries or track where each machinery would go. So we then propose these different strategies to reduce the carbon emissions, and we can also compare the carbon emissions between options during master planning. For example, if we provide more greenery in option A, how does that affect option B? Or we can change a building footprint in option A, would that affect the renewable generation? And all those sort of stuff is how we justify what we do. From a master planning level, this is what we're normally looking at. The top 4 blue areas are where it's generating the most carbon. From buildings, we look at generally the electricity or town gas use and the refrigerant leakage. Transport, we look at road-based transport, so general vehicles, the public transport. Water-based is more of how water is transported and how they are treated. Waste, we've got the municipal solid waste, the energy used in recycling, and source-separated food waste, so the related carbon for them. And then the water demand is water supply, water demand, and the sewage infrastructure. So this is the actual operations of individual facilities rather than how much energy is used to transport the water. The bottom 2 green one are the carbon reduction. Energy, for example, from renewable energy, and urban forests from softscapes, so the urban sinks. So this is what we're trying to compare when we're looking at the different scenarios. For example, if it's a conservative scenario, we're assuming a certain lower percentage of buildings would have a renewable generation. How would that compare if we were saying to adjust energy uses or adjust how we put the parks, or how much softscape and hardscape? From an infrastructure point of view, when we're looking at carbon, we break down to material and activity levels. From the material elements, we look at how raw materials are extracted, how they are transported from raw material to production to warehouse sometimes, or maybe directly to site. From an activity elements point of view, we look at the manpower, how many people are on site, what types of equipment is used, the types of fuel is used. So infrastructure right now, we're most of the time using BREEAM infrastructure projects. But this one is more international, and a lot of the criteria are quite UK-based. From a carbon point of view, it looks at how carbon is associated with the infrastructure from its inception to the end of life. So with the different criteria here, so for example, the one below, the table down below, it says it's more of like how much credit is assigned to how well we're doing in terms of how we manage our carbon. For example, did we conform with a particular clause? Did we look at how to quantify greenhouse gases? Or did we actually go further, for example, look at reporting and how to continually improve with the development, how we integrate the various carbon aspects into our infrastructure construction and operation, and whether or not the different stakeholders have been involved in this decision. And we also look at, in terms of infrastructure, the whole life of the infrastructure. So from 7.73, so still the same bottom table. So this is how much we've done. For example, whether or not we did a product life cycle assessment, screening, completion. So those are types that are actually related to how many credits we get. Unfortunately for Hong Kong, sometimes we don't always do everything on this list. One of the projects that I have, we're trying to go for the second highest rating in BREEAM infrastructure. But with the way that the industry is structured and the way that the industry process is, we don't do the full life cycle assessment. We don't do the product life cycle assessment. We don't have a complete carbon footprint. We don't even have a complete life cycle assessment. What we normally do is that we look at particular parts of the construction processes or even construction materials themselves, rather than looking at the full life. So this is an extract from the actual manual themselves. So you can see that, for example, number 2, to do screening carbon footprint, it needs to look at the significant sources of emission over the expected lifetime of the asset. So we're looking at the whole asset throughout the whole life cycle from conception to its final lifetime. And even then, we don't do it that much in our current process. And for complete carbon assessment, we need to do it for everything. So from scope 1 to scope 2 to scope 3, we need to look at all of the emissions, all of the related transport. And that is sometimes particularly hard to do, especially given the short time frame we have when we're generating the different designs and generating the different construction programs. Carbon associated with energy is also quite an important factor when trying to get the credits for this. And there's already 9 credits inside for energy, including how it's implemented, whether or not we've achieved a certain reduction, did we consider during design, during operation, did we, the contractor themselves, did they actually do anything to reduce the carbon, and how we monitor the carbon associated with the construction. So all this, everything is not just a singular a consultant can do. What we do is we propose, we write down all the different briefs and tenders, hoping somehow the contractor and the client would follow if they want to achieve a certain grade. So this is just some of the things that we actually have to look at. The project that I have trying to go for this particular certification is having a bit of a time trying to figure out how to incorporate all the various requirements for the contractor. Because if we want to incorporate this many restrictions on the contractor, there's also the associated cost. And clients don't like that. What they want is to have a low cost to build the infrastructure, but at the same time, they want to achieve, for example, the second highest grading. And there are always trade-offs, and how we trade off and how we convince our clients to actually take up a particular carbon strategy is a trick that we need to learn over time and to come to a consensus with the client. So right now, I'll just look at a quick case study on the climate plan for Copenhagen. The Copenhagen 2025 plan, so it's right now, and it's already way past it, but just a quick overview is to address the climate challenges and to have a emission reduction framework and to promote a green growth. And these were the strategic directions from the Copenhagen plan. So you've got the energy trying to shift from fossil fuel, kind of similar to what we have in Hong Kong as well. But because of their location, they can incorporate better wind and solar energy and being able to realize the renewable energy. With mobility, they expand the cycling infrastructure. Hong Kong is also doing something like that with the new developments, trying to integrate the various different cycling networks together in new territories to make it easier to travel between different towns. Electric public transport and incentives for lower emission vehicles. The last one we're not so much doing in Hong Kong, but the second one at least we do. From the city administration side, they were having energy efficiency improvement, green urban building planning, building retrofitting, energy standards enforcement. Energy standards enforcement, we've already done in Hong Kong quite a long time ago with the energy labeling. Building retrofitting, slowly retrofitting older buildings, or at least renewing older buildings with the new updated system. Green urban planning is the introduction of more green spaces, and energy efficiency is through in Hong Kong by the Beam Plus building certification most of the time. Their goal was carbon neutrality by 2025. How did they do about that? In energy, carbon neutral district heating is something that they did quite well. They introduced district cooling quite early on. In Hong Kong, we're still trying to do that. Electricity production, as I said before, they've got great wind locations. They can build wind farms. In Hong Kong, we're still trying to focus on how we can incorporate renewable energy production. For example, we only have it on building rooftop, where we might need to explore whether or not we can produce it from the walls of the buildings or even from floating infrastructure, because we've got more sea than land. They have plastic and waste source separated. Hong Kong, we've already done that. Biogasification of organic waste is more of the biogas side, which I've mentioned before. Hong Kong is not so much easy to implement. In Copenhagen, 75% of all trips are on foot, or bike, or transport, because they've got such a good network. We have the luxury of public transport, but we still are quite reliant on private vehicles, especially on the diesel fuel. But of course, we're now transitioning into electric vehicles. What they've done, which is better, is to have it light vehicles run on the new fuels, and also the heavy vehicles. So, for example, the heavy goods vehicles running more on new fuels. In Hong Kong, we're still trying, but we're not so much getting there just yet because it's not popularized or because of cost. But overall, in city administration, both sides are quite similar, being able to integrating the various different energy reduction, energy efficiency measures. So this is what they've actually done. So how many turbines they've built, or how many cyclists, and all that sort of stuff. So just overall, from now, by 2021, they've already reduced the carbon emissions level. They've piloted zero emissions construction sites. They have wind and biofuel, and there's waste energy plant covering 32% of the district heating demands, and being able to access the 9-cycle super waste. So the 9-cycle super waste is quite interesting, because these are kind of like the highways for cyclists, where they have quick, safe access from point A to point B, kind of like the expressways for cars. So they've actually managed to achieve, they've increased the renewable energy, they've managed to increase public transport infrastructure, they improved the air quality overall, and being able to have a positive impact on the public health. But there are still challenges. So even though they have a climate plan for around 10, 15 years, I think it was, they still couldn't achieve everything because of, for example, legislation. There's people not wanting to take up cycling, or not being able to access particular things. So those types of these types of distractions, you can say, are what's hindering a climate plan, and we can actually see it in Hong Kong as well. While we integrate various different initiatives inside our master plan, sometimes what's holding us back is not only technology, it could be policies, it could be just people, or it could be just access to certain things. So they've revised the climate action plan because they couldn't achieve I'm hoping that in Hong Kong we don't have to revise our 2050 plan again, because otherwise everything we do is for naught and we'll have to do everything all over again. But what they did was tone down things a bit. So it's to achieve climate positivity and reduce consumption, reduce emissions, rather than going to the full carbon neutrality route. They try to tone down how they go about integrating carbon or integrating carbon initiatives and trying to more improving efficiency rather than just saying we have to go for the neutral route. And yeah, let's see if there's any questions. Do you want to know more about a certain project?
Anything you want Ariel to explain further, or maybe give you some examples?
Oh, yeah, I don't mind, unless you've got any big examples, for example, or I can actually talk about one of the projects we're doing in a new development area that we're trying to incorporate actually I'll talk a bit about how we're trying to reduce carbon for construction. One of the things that we're doing in a new development area is trying to incorporate circular economy concepts inside for creating an environment to ensure that waste is not just waste. So master planning is not just saying, oh, we need to incorporate certain initiatives. Sometimes we're trying to incorporate ideas themselves. Circular economy is one of the ideas that we're trying to implement. And it might be a new technology right now, but maybe when it comes to when you're doing or when you're into the industry, it'll become like a norm, quite like electric vehicles, hydrogen.
This seminar may give you some idea about your individual assignment. So in your individual assignment, you need to propose some mitigation strategies for an existing building, right? So maybe what Ariel has mentioned, like the green infrastructure or maybe the green mobility, so these could be some possible mitigation strategies for you, okay? So if you have no further questions, maybe we just end here. And then next week, we will study the carbon economics. Okay, so we will see you next week. Thank you. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you.